Uno. Hello, hi, how are you? Hello, is this thing on?
Hello. Well, we hope you enjoyed last week's episode.
Yeah.
It was fun. Spooky stories.
That's true. The spooky stories. I loved that.
That was fun. That was actually the last episode we recorded.
Yes.
Even though
that
we were
was in order.
That was fun.
Yeah.
And then we had an adventurous moment after the fact.
That was true. I cried laughing.
I peed myself.
And I said, this is why you bring extra clothes, because it's like daycare.
Yeah.
You never know when you're going to pee your pants.
Because I had an extra pair of sweatpants and an extra pair of jeans in the bag.
Because you never know when you're going to need them.
Well, see, I had on leggings, and I didn't know if, we were going to go grab dinner if I didn't feel like wearing leggings, if I'd want to put on jeans. And then I brought the sweatpants to be comfy later on. And this way, too, I can just go home and crawl straight into bed.
There you go.
Because it is 12:53, and we still have 2 episodes to go, so.
Yeah. All right. Let's dive right on into it. So, if you've seen the title of the episode, you know we're talking about torture this week and torture devices. And so I just wanted to slap a huge... this is a trigger warning heavy spooky season. So I wanted to go ahead and slap a big, huge trigger warning at the beginning of this episode for graphic and gruesome depictions of various forms of torture. So if we're not getting your listen this spooky season, we totally understand. We really just wanted to put our whole ussies into it this year, and I feel like we've done that. So throughout all of history, the human race have used torture devices to punish their enemies and those accused of crimes. Torture has also been used to elicit confessions of guilt or convince the victim to rat on other people, despite the fact that torture doesn't produce reliable information because more often than not, the victim will confess to anything just to get it to stop. And this isn't any kind of newfangled thought, but even Napoleon Bonaparte was like, no, this really doesn't work. Some have taken their looks into the past and let their imaginations run away with them when it comes to torture and torture devices. Ancient Greek histories pass down fantastic tales that may not have been intended for the reader to take literally. And in the modern era, this still occurs, as many have accused medieval Europeans of using some of the most gruesome torture devices that most likely didn't really even exist at the time, which perpetuated the myth of the less than civilized Dark Ages. The following torture devices are famous throughout history, whether mythical or real, but they still captivate the imaginations of people. We will start with one such mythical torture device, which was the brazen bull, which was supposed to have been used by Phalaris, who was a tyrant that ruled part of Sicily in the 6th century BCE. This device consisted of a life-size bronze bull that was hollow on the inside and had a door on the outside. The torturer would place their victim inside the bull and then light a fire underneath it. The fire would roast the victim to death, and the acoustic system of the bull would make the victim's screams sound like bull noises to anyone standing outside of it.
That's crazy.
Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote of this device, and he lived about 500 years after the events allegedly took place. And this story was also referenced by Italian poet and philosopher Dante in Inferno. If not a myth, it is at least very highly embellished. So there may be some truth to it, and maybe not.
The first one I'm going to talk about is the rack. This torture device, known as the rack, has a long and brutal history, stretching back as far as earlier than its fame in medieval England. Historians believe that its origins lie in ancient Greece, where devices resembling the rack were used to torment prisoners. One of the earliest known victims was Herostratus, the infamous arsonist, who in the 4th century BCE set fire to the temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. After his capture, he was tortured to death on an early form of the rack. Centuries later, the rack appeared again in medieval Europe, becoming especially notorious in England. One of the most famous early victims of rack-like torture was William Wallace, the Scottish rebel leader. After his capture by the English in 1305, Wallace was subjected to a series of horrific punishments, including being stretched. His brutal death was meant to serve as a warning to others who dared rebel against English rule. By 15th century, the rack had become firmly established in England. Its introduction is often credited to the Duke of Exeter, who served as constable of the Tower of London. Because of his role in bringing it to prominence, the device became grimly nicknamed the Duke of Exeter's daughter. Wait. Yeah. I was like, did I combine two things that I didn't mean to? And I may have. I don't know. From that time on, the rack became one of the tower's most feared instruments of torture. The rack itself was deceptively simple in design. It consisted of a rectangular wooden frame with rollers at either end. A victim's wrists and ankles would be tied to ropes fastened to these rollers. By turning a mechanical crank, the torturers could stretch the prisoner's body, pulling joints apart, snapping ligaments, and sometimes even tearing limbs completely free. The turning of the rollers was often carried out slowly, deliberately increasing the pressure and agony. This prolonged torment forced many victims to confess to their crimes or betray their associates. At the Tower of London, the device was frequently used by the yeoman warders, the guards responsible for the prison. Beginning in the 15th century, they employed the rack against people who accused of treason or religious heresy, often demanding that the victim not only confess, but also reveal the name of supposed conspirators. One of the rack's most famous victims was the Protestant preacher and writer Anne Askew. In 1546, she was arrested for her outspoken faith and brought to the Tower. There, yeoman warders placed her on the rack and demanded that she name other Protestant sympathizers. Despite the excruciating torture, she refused to give up anyone. The ordeal left her so mangled and crippled that she could no longer walk. Later that year, she was condemned and burned at the stake, carried to her execution because she was unable to stand. The rack remained a symbol of terror for centuries. Its purpose was clear: to break both body and the will. Victims were laid out helplessly, their limbs pulled farther and further apart, joints dislocating, muscles tearing, and unbearable pain compelling them to reveal secrets or confessions. Though the rack was just one of many cruel devices of medieval torture, it became the most infamous and the one most associated with agony and merciless interrogation. Its official use in England endured until the early modern period. It was not formally banned in Britain until 1708, yet the idea and occasional practice of the rack lingered far longer. In fact, it was only in 1984 that the United Nations prohibited its use worldwide, placing the device among the universally condemned instruments of torture. Cruel but simple, the rack's reputation has outlasted its use. From Herostratus in ancient Greece to William Wallace, Anne Askew, and countless unnamed victims at the Tower of London, the rack has remained one of the most infamous torture devices in history, a grim reminder of the extremes to which human cruelty can go. That's probably the most descriptive out of all these devices that I have.
It's probably the most common.
Yeah.
That might be why. But, like, two things. First thing, 1985 is crazy. Did you say
84?
84? 1984.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was off by a year. It's crazy. And secondly, the English really love torturing people.
Hell yeah, brother.
That is the one thing about the English. No offense, but y'all do be having a history. I mean, I can't say much as an American, but y'all do be having a history of torture. Ancient Greek historian Polybus wrote that the Spartan king Nabis, who ruled from 207 to 192 BCE, had built a torture robot that looked like his wife, Pega.
I love you so much. I'm going to create a torture device that looks
Oh, no,
like
no, 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 no.
Okay.
Hear me out. Leaning more into the realm of fantasy, he wrote that whenever Nobis was attempting to collect taxes from someone who refused to pay, the king would invite the person to hug his wife and direct the person toward the robot.
Okay.
When the victim would embrace the robot, it would draw it in its arms, effectively crushing the victim with its iron hooks that were hidden beneath its clothing.
Okay.
Modern scholars have suggested that this story of the tax-collecting torture robot was entirely a work of fiction, and the iron apega never actually existed.
That's a good idea, though.
Yeah.
So the next one I have, The Scavenger's Daughter, which is, now you see why I was like, did I combine two?
Yeah.
The device was a metal frame that compressed the body's victim, compressed the victim's body in on itself. The compression would be so intense that the victim would start bleeding from most orifices. Most of these cases would result in death. I lost my spot. This device was most notably used in the 16th and 17th century by yeoman warders at the Tower of London. So, like...
Here we go with English speaking.
Right. Like, bent over.
Yeah.
Like this. Bent over double and crushing it in on itself.
Ooh.
That's all I got for them.
A device labeled by early modern Europeans as a medieval torture device was the pear of anguish. This device is separated into metallic segments which expand at the turn of a screw. Allegedly, the torturer would insert the device into any given orifice in order to widen it and cause extreme pain. For example, if it was inserted into the mouth, the ideal result would be that the teeth would shatter and the jaw would eventually break. But scholars have questioned whether these devices originated in the Middle Ages, which ended around 1450. Is there existing examples of the so-called pear of anguish that contained coiled springs, which suggests that they were crafted by people who lived during the early modern period that followed the Middle Ages. These origins of the existing examples are unknown, though, and there are questions as to whether the function of these would really have been to widen an orifice or if they served a different purpose. I hope it was for a different purpose. There was a lot of talk of buttholes.
I started saying my initial thought was not the mouth.
I did that purposefully.
Okay.
I did that purposefully. Because even thinking about where it could go, it made me feel icky.
Yeah.
And so I said, let me use the mouth as an example.
All right. So the next one I have is the knee splitter. This device was made of about 20 spikes on 2 wooden blocks. The spikes would face each other with 2 large screws. The spikes would be placed on the leg of the victim, and then by tightening the screws, the 2 boards and, of course, spikes would draw in closer together, and this would crush the victim's knee. That's all I got. I couldn't find a whole lot on that one, but it just made me...
Resembling a pair of gardening shears, the tongue tearer was a device that was pretty straightforward considering the name of it. The tongue tearer would first be heated over a fire and was designed to be clamped to the victim's tongue, which would then be ripped out. The executioner would twist and pull, really whatever works the best to cause the most amount of pain is what he would do. And this was seen as a useful way of dealing with those accused of committing blasphemy or spreading heretical lies, as it would silence them in a very literal sense.
So this next one was pretty common.
Yeah.
And I have seen it in movies that were like very recently placed. Okay. Yeah. So like, what was it? I think it's in one of the Fast and Furious movies, to be real.
Okay.
So this one is rat torture.
Oh, yeah.
Among the many cruel methods of torment devised in the Middle Ages, one of the most horrifying was rat torture. Unlike some of the more elaborate torture devices of the era, this method was striking in its simplicity, but no less brutal in its effect. The process began by restraining the victim, who was usually laid down on their back so that they could not move. A rat, or sometimes several rats, was then placed directly on the victim's stomach or abdomen. To prevent the rodent from escaping, the torturer trapped it under some sort of covering, such as a bucket, a metal container, or a bottomless cage secured tightly against the body. At first, the sight and feeling of the squirming creatures was enough to instill terror and disgust. According to accounts, even this initial stage was often sufficient to make a prisoner confess, but the torment did not end there. The torturer would then begin to heat the container, often by placing hot coals or fire against it. As the heat built up, the rat inside would begin to panic. Driven by fear and desperation, it would claw and bite furiously in an attempt to escape. With no way out, the most promising route for the animal was downward through the victim's own body. The rat would then begin to dig and burrow through the abdomen, gnawing through flesh in its frantic effort to flee the heat. This process was slow, excruciating, and often fatal, as the victim's insides were literally eaten away from within. Rat torture was remembered as particularly effective interrogation techniques as a particularly effective interrogation technique in the Middle Ages. Faced with such an agonizing threat, many prisoners gave up information or confessions almost immediately, hoping to avoid the torment. For those who endured it, however, the method guaranteed an exceptionally drawn-out and agonizing death. In comparison with other medieval methods, ranging from the overt violence of the Spanish donkey, which we will learn about later, to the psychological torment of immurement, which we will also learn about later, rat torture stands out for its chilling mixture of simplicity and savagery. All it required was a rat, a container, and a fire, yet it produced one of the most gruesome deaths imaginable.
Yeah. That's pretty bad. I was just thinking that I think the usage of effective for interrogations, I would have said anything to not have to do that.
Right.
I mean, they're probably going to kill you anyway.
I started saying, but it sounds as though whether they confessed, it sounds as though whether they confessed or not, they were still going to get it.
Yeah. But, God, that sounds terrible. The heretic's fork was used during the Spanish Inquisition, and it looked like a double-ended fork, each with two prongs, held by a leather strap that would go around the victim's neck. One end went just under the chin, and the other against the breastbone. Once it was on, the victim would not be able to speak or sleep, as any movement at all would drive the forks into their flesh. This is a prime example of a torture device used pretty exclusively to elicit confessions from those accused of heresy. It was not meant to kill, but meant to torment the victim, often pushing victims to the brink of madness.
The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was one of history's most gruesome methods of execution. Unlike many medieval torture devices, its primary purpose was not interrogation, but execution through prolonged suffering. It was used from antiquity all the way up to the 19th century, making it one of the longest-lasting instruments of public punishment. The device itself was deceptively simple, essentially a large wooden wheel, often the size of a cartwheel. Its versatility allowed executioners to inflict suffering in multiple ways. The wheel would be dropped onto a victim's limbs, crushing and breaking bones. Alternatively, the condemned could be tied to the wheel's spokes and beaten with a cudgel until their body gave out. Some executions combine both methods, maximizing pain and prolonging death. The origins of the breaking wheel trace back to Roman times, where it first appeared as a brutal method of dispatching criminals. Over time, its use spread across Europe, particularly during the Middle Ages, where it became one of the most feared punishments reserved for the worst crimes. Two primary methods of the execution by wheel developed. In the first, the condemned was killed outright when a large wheel was dropped onto their body, shattering their bones in an instant. In the second, far more agonizing version, The victim was tied securely to the wheel, and an executioner method. Say that word for me.
What is it? Methodology? What are you looking
Methodically.
Methodically.
Yeah, there we go. It's just not, I'm tired. Broke their bones with a cudgel, and this could be done swiftly or drawn out depending on the severity of the offense. In France, executioners often tied the condemned to the wheel and then slowly rotated it while striking with a cudgel. For those guilty of lesser crimes, the executioner might deal only 1 or 2 crippling blows before administering the coup de grace, a final death stroke. For those convicted of serious offenses, however, the strikes could be many, leaving the victim alive but shattered for hours or even days before death. In 15th century Zurich, another grisly variation was practiced. The condemned was tied face down with the wheel placed on their back. The executioner then delivered 9 deliberate blows, 2 to each limb, 1 to the spine. Afterward, the broken body was braided through the wheel's spokes, twisted unnaturally into the gaps of the wood, and the wheel was then mounted on a pole for public display. Other versions of the punishment involved additional torments. The wheel could be set over a fire, roasting the victim alive as they burned and suffocated. In some cases, it was even rolled down a rocky hillside, bouncing the tied body against the ground and stones below. Certain wheels were modified with spikes, which impaled the victim's back as they were bound to it. To complete this horrific spectacle, the wheel, along with the mutilated body, was often hoisted high as a warning to others. Much like crucifixion, this gruesome display was believed to not only terrify would-be criminals, but also prevent the deceased from transitioning to resurrection, condemning them even beyond death. From its emergence in Roman antiquity, through its widespread use in the Middle Ages, and even into the 19th century, the breaking wheel remained a feared symbol of public justice. It was both a method of execution and a brutal tool of intimidation, designed to stretch death into a prolonged display of agony and shame. I like how I got real descriptive on that one.
Yeah. And what your face looks like hearing this is exactly what my face looks like hearing this. I guarantee it.
But the sad part is, my face was none of that reading it.
But here I was like, okay, now mine are about to get unhinged. But no, that was pretty. I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, humans are horrible to each other. God, that's terrible. That's awful. And I've got the Spanish donkey next. So, also known as a chevalet or wooden horse, the Spanish donkey was one of the worst medieval torture devices. I thought. It was thought to have emerged during the Holy Inquisition in 12th century France. The device was made of wood and shaped like a triangular prism on stilts, with the triangle's point facing upward. The victim would sit atop the triangle, which would cause severe discomfort to their genitals. It wasn't uncommon for the torturer to add weights to the victim's ankles to slowly weigh them down. Sometimes the torturer would even tickle their feet or hold a flame to their feet to cause them to squirm. Which would increase agony. Horrifyingly, spikes could be added to the point of the triangle, which would increase the likelihood of severe genital injury. Luckily, individuals would only face some intense discomfort, but if they weren't one of the lucky ones, it could result in agonizing pain, permanent disfigurement, and even death in some cases. This device was used long after the Middle Ages ended, and in 17th century Canada, it was used as a form of punishment for anything from blasphemy to gluttony. And in one horrifying case, a man was punished for being gluttonous, and he ruptured after he was placed on top of the Spanish donkey.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Does ball sack, like,
maybe
bust?
Probably.
Okay.
It was even used as late as the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War in the U.S. In 1775, George Washington condoned the use of the Spanish donkey against a man for threatening and abusing a number of persons when the prisoner is in the quarter guard, but he was only made to sit on it for about 15 minutes. In the 1860s, it was used by Union troops against Confederate prisoners of war.
Mm. Despite its reputation as one of the most recognizable of medieval torture devices, there is no evidence of the Iron Maiden being used during any periods. But according to Skoda, the earliest reference of it being used seems to be 1802. As the story goes, the victim was enclosed in an upright iron coffin with an interior lined with spikes, which were driven into the body when the doors were shut. This did not mean instant death, though. The spikes were of specific lengths to pierce vital organs while prolonging suffering, with it taking hours for the victim to bleed out. It gets worse. 2 spikes in the Iron Maiden were positioned to pierce the eyes.
French historian Ferdinand Braudel once said of the Judas cradle that it was a symbol of the barbarism and cruelty of the Middle Ages. Its use is a stain on human history and a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink. In some ways, it is similar to the Spanish donkey. It is a device that is shaped like a pyramid, with a tip atop 4 legs. The victim would be suspended from the ceiling and slowly lowered down onto the Judas cradle so that the tip would penetrate their genitals or anus.
Okay.
Again, the victims would sometimes have weights added to their body so that they were pulled down even further. Sometimes the tip of the Judas cradle would be spiked so that it caused the maximum amount of agony. Interrogators would sometimes rock the device so that it would dig in even deeper. Victims were more often than not left for hours or even days at a time on the device, which caused excruciating pain, serious disfigurement, and abysmally deep humiliation. As you can imagine, victims quickly confessed to whatever it was they were being accused of, anything to get the torture to stop. The Judas cradle was effectively used during the Spanish Inquisition, as the interrogators would yield this torture device to elicit confessions, but even those who confessed were not spared from the pain, and many of them died soon after undergoing this torture.
One of the cruelest punishment devices in the past, the breast ripper, was used primarily on women accused of adultery or blasphemy. This horrifying instrument consisted of metal claws that were heated and used to tear the flesh apart. Victims endured agony beyond comprehension, making it one of the most brutal torture devices you've never heard of.
Yeah. During the Middle Ages, this is the one that I said we would get in trouble. Women being called a scold could be a dangerous proclamation. This term referred to anyone, but primarily women, who gossiped, slandered others, fought loudly, or spoke out of turn. And the punishment for some scolds was the medieval torture device known as the scold's bridle. I fear we would have been fucked.
Yep.
Essentially, this was an iron mask that would be fitted over a woman's face. A lock in the back held it into place, and a metal gag held the woman's tongue down if she spoke. The device served a dual purpose in that it would silence women accused of being a scold, and it would humiliate her. The woman would often be forced to walk through town or stand in the main square so that everyone around could see her shame. The first mention of this torture device came during the 14th century when one of Geoffrey Chaucer's characters said, would she were bolted with a bridle. Later anecdotes describe how women who were accused of being scolds or having loose morals were punished with a scold's bridle. This device was used for hundreds of years, and it wasn't until the beginning of the Victorian era that it was declared to be barbaric, and the last known use of the scold's bridle was in 1856. This device was painful and humiliating, and the sole purpose was to show women everywhere how dangerous it could be to speak their minds.
You know what it didn't lock down?
That dick? What?
These. No, I was going to say these hands.
Oh, yeah. Like, fuck all y'all. Put a curse on you. Put a curse on you. Okay. Go ahead.
I fear that we have reached the point in the night.
No return.
So this one is similar to the Iron Maiden, but the coffin torture. This is a form of execution and confinement that would leave victims in a cage that was shaped like a human, and it would be hanging in the air. The inhabitants of the cage were left exposed to nature. No food, no protection from birds pecking on them, nothing. And there was really no room for them to sit when their legs got tired.
Oh, hell. That's insane.
So, like, that's like...
that alone would drive me insane.
You know, the part in Supernatural where they're in the other world and Mary got caught and they've got her in that cage where she's standing up?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Spoiler alert.
This one was pretty bad. After the Vikings...
Is it, though?
After the Vikings invaded England during the 9th century, it is said they introduced one of the most brutal torture methods known to man, the blood eagle. In 867 CE, the Viking known as Ivar the Boneless was said to have set out to exact revenge on Elaia, the king of Northumbria, who had killed Ivar's father, Ragnar Lothbrok, by throwing him into a pit of live snakes.
First of all, Ragnar Lothbrok.
It was spelled B-R-O-K.
That's wrong.
In my source. So it looks like Loth.
I got you.
But Ivar knew exactly how he wanted to punish Elaia, and once he got his hands on the king, it is said that he subjected him to death via blood eagle. For this torture, the victim's hands and legs were tied up and their bare back is exposed. The executioner would then stab the victims by their tailbone and up toward the rib cage. From there, each rib would be separated from the backbone with an axe. With the victim's internal organs exposed, the torturer would then pull out the lungs to create a gory and eagle wing type of display. As if this wasn't horrific enough, allegedly the victim would still be alive during all of this, but of course that didn't last for very long. What with the lungs out.
Yeah.
Some experts do believe that this torture was exaggerated by later authors to emphasize the brutality of the Vikings. However, others support the notion that it was a very real sacrificial ritual. The blood eagle, if it ever existed, stands as one of the most horrifying torture methods to come from the Middle Ages. That one was pretty gross.
You want to hear some fucked up shit?
No.
Those two people that you mentioned?
Yeah. Oh, haven't you said
that's part of my family lineage. Yeah. From what I can find.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I've read so many things to say that they're not even real people. But I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just read the coffin torture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The Spanish tickler. This medieval era tool was used to shred the skin of victims. It was a claw-like device that was made sharp enough to have no issues tearing through flesh. Those tears would turn into wounds that most likely got infected and then turned fatal. It's one of the most feared torture methods in medieval Europe.
Ew. My last one. My final selection of torture Doesn't involve ropes, sharp objects, or bloodshed, but is still a torturous way to die. The practice of immurement dates back to the Roman times when it was used against Vestal virgins who broke their vow of celibacy. Because it was forbidden to spill the blood of a Vestal virgin, often they were entombed alive inside of a tiny vault and left to slowly die of starvation. This method was carried into the Middle Ages. Nuns and priests who broke their vows of chastity or expressed any heretical ideas were sometimes sealed in a small room. They were sometimes given food and allowed to survive in the tiny room, but not for very long, typically. There may be a potential link between immurement and the song London Bridge is Falling Down. In the 19th century, an author noted that one version of the rhyme includes the stanza, "Take the key and lock her up. Lock her up, lock her up. Take the key and lock her up, my fair lady." The author suggested that this stanza hints at the immurement of someone to bless the London Bridge and ensure that it would never collapse. There is not much evidence to support the idea that this actually ever happened, though. Immurement was practiced across different ages and different cultures, and as a form of torture, it was an efficient way to drive someone completely mad, completely out of their minds.
Well, my last one is the head crusher. It's pretty much what you're thinking it's going to be. The device was most commonly used in interrogations. It was made to put pressure on the skull. It was tightened gradually upon the discretion of the interrogator. As you may have already concluded, this would cause skull fractures, brain damage, and ultimately death.
So our nonprofit is about mental health.
Because everybody if you enjoyed that a little bit too much,
contact Tennessee Voices. They are Tennessee's collaborative leader in mental health and family well-being. And each year they serve thousands of children, parents, and adults all across 95 counties with services that prevent crisis, heal trauma, and build long-term stability, including some school-based and outpatient counseling for children and teens, peer and clinical support for adults addressing trauma, depression, and substance use, family-centered services including caregiver therapy, parenting coaching, and early childhood home visiting, housing stabilization and wraparound programs to keep families intact and prevent system involvement, advocacy and education to reduce stigma and expand access and change the policies that perpetuate inequity. They have a whole family, trauma-informed, and community-driven model by healing parents alongside their children, providing critical resources like housing and mental health support, and advocating for systemic change. Tennessee Voices helps families thrive and communities grow stronger. If you feel inclined to donate to this organization, there will be a link to do so directly to the organization in the description and on our socials,
which are Facebook,
Instagram,
TikTok,
YouTube.
And you can reach out to us to let us know if you've got any ideas or whatever at wandersofweird@gmail.com. Ow. Okay, bye.
Bye.